Hare Krishna and welcome, dear ladies. Welcome to the September Urban Devi, a Sangha and Women's Discussion Group. A special welcome to those joining us for the first time. If you are joining us for the first time, please write it in the chat so that we can all say hello. My name is Damodar Priya Devidasi, and I co-host this monthly gathering with our dear Rukmini Devidasi, or Rukmini Walker as she's also known, and Surabhi Govinda Devidasi. So let me introduce our guest speaker for today. Her name is Dhanya Rico, and Dhanya is a musician, a traveling kirtaniya, and a world-renowned educator on topics of personal and relationship wellness. She holds a master's degree in counselor education and a specialist degree in couples and family therapy. For over a decade, Dhanya has helped empower individuals and relationships to thrive with deep spiritual principles at the core of transformational experiences. Dhanya co-facilitates pilgrimages around the world, allowing participants to immerse themselves in the culture and practices and mysticism of the path of devotion. And today we're going to have the pleasure of hearing on her topic, relationships, the garden of the spirit. So she's going to bring us in on the importance of healthy relationships in our spiritual development. We're going to explore how Bhakti wisdom, as well as tools developed by relationship experts, will help us learn how different relationships in our lives are actually fertile ground for nurturing our devotional heart. So welcome, Dhanya. We're so happy to have you here. Please, the floor is yours.
Hare Krishna, dear Vaishnavis. I'll start by offering my respect and begging blessings from our teachers who have handed down this wisdom, teachers seen and unseen, who will guide us and also protect us on this path. Om Gyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatale Shatarini Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I feel so happy and blessed to be here in a gathering of women who are here hopefully eager, to learn about the mysteries of relationship and how they are actually meant to foster our spiritual growth. And I would even venture to say that our relationships are the fuel for our spiritual growth, and they also serve as evidence of our spiritual growth, right? There's often, because our society and the external kind of manifestation of material energy is very shaped by masculine energy. So it's very results oriented. It's very achievement oriented, right? Especially kind of modern civilization, postmodern civilization, everything that's kind of been characterized by like rationalism and industrialization and all of that. It all kind of drives us to seek evidence, achievement, accolades, right? It very much shapes us in the psychology of achievement orientation and meritocracy, right? And this is actually quite antithetical to the nature of any devotional faith, because devotional faith acknowledges the foundation of grace, that God's love, Goddess's love, is so great that it's impossible to achieve. It's impossible to deserve. Right? I have a dear friend, Padmanabha Swami, who says God's love is too much to deserve. Right? It's so unfathomably large and expansive and ever expanding that there is no like meritocracy ladder we could possibly climb and then kind of ring a bell at the top and say ding ding ding, like now I have devotion, now I, have entered into a relationship with divinity. And so I think that because there has been such an emphasis on that masculine approach, those of us, especially people who are embodied as women in this lifetime, but I think anybody who has an inclination toward devotion has a sense that there's some relational aspect of our practice of our faith that needs to be nourished. And because those of us who are embodied as women in this lifetime perhaps have a social advantage or a familial advantage or even an intuitive or emotional advantage to be attuned perhaps more to the heart and to be attuned more to relationships, whether it's because it's been programmed or whether because it's natural or a combination thereof or karmic, um, it can be an enormous gift, starting with our immediate surroundings and then expanding out into our greater community to really search out how do our relationships nourish our devotion and how do they inform us of how deep that devotion is really taking root. So that's kind of the premise. That's the area that I'm fascinated, the area that I'm a student of. um, and so that's what I was hoping to share with you all today. So one of the reasons why I find that this harmonizes very nicely with any devotional path, but specifically with the path of bhakti, which is the path that I'm most familiar with, let's say, um, is because essentially what we're doing is trying to expand our empathic connection, right? Empathy meaning our ability to resonate with and recognize and reflect another's emotions, another's feelings. Our empathic connection, we ultimately want to aim that at divinity, right? At our source. We want to be able to empathically connect with God and Goddess and the lovers of God and Goddess. And that's actually how we approach divinity, is by surrounding ourselves with people who do have a seemingly deep connection with divinity. And the more that we empathically connect with that practitioner or that teacher or those models, role models of deep devotion, the more we actually start to kind of be able to imbibe that mood. And that's a very big principle in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, which is that the seed of devotion is actually planted by another, right? That's what would maybe be categorized as sadhu sangha. So sadhu sangha means sadhu, someone who's in touch with sat, with truth, right? Someone who is in touch with truth by just coming into contact with somebody who's really authentically living their faith, a seed becomes planted in our own heart. And then the continuous quality time spent with like-minded spiritual practitioners, like you all do here in this space, a continuation of like deep, heartfelt relationship built around wanting to connect to divinity. That's what waters that seed. That's what waters that seed and allows it to take root and allows it to start to sprout. And it's something that's not always seen, right? Sometimes it takes like a long time watering and watering, watering, and you're like, will it sprout? What happened with the seed? Is something going on? Like, right? I'm a pretty notorious I don't want to say plant killer because that sounds like it's an intentional thing, but I don't have a green thumb exactly. I grew up in the city, and even though I've lived in the country for many years now, there's just like only the plants that are almost completely self-sufficient will survive under my care. Um, so there is a wondering of like, is everything okay in there? And I think that that's a valid questioning in our own Bhakti Lata, which is the seed of devotion. It's like, is everything okay in there? Because I seem to be watering and there seems to be sunshine. I think the soil is okay. And like, where's the sprout? So eventually, hopefully, and as a just like an actual plant, like even if you watered it, even if you set up the environment, the miracle of life that takes place from a seed splitting and the sprout growing, like that is pure grace. That's grace. So in that same miraculous way, whatever inclination toward real devotion, real feeling, or even real curiosity, which is 100% a valid spiritual emotion, that starts to sprout. And then there's hope, right? There's hope. And then, in the scriptures, one of our grandfather teachers, he explains that as you water that seed, because you're watering everything that's in the soil, then also sometimes weeds grow, right? And there's a very beautiful text in our tradition called the Madhurya Kadambini, which is it describes pretty specifically what kind of weeds can grow even as a result of us becoming more serious in our spiritual practice. And a lot of it has to do with, getting kind of fixated on the niceties that might come about of our, service, and becoming prominent and well known, or, feeling kind of very satisfied with whatever we've done. So there's all kinds of weeds, right? Like ego traps and, things like that can come up as we are trying to carefully water the seed of our devotion. And those weeds have to be very, very carefully taken out, right? We want to do it in such a way that it also doesn't disturb that very tender creeper that's growing, right? There's a way where you can kind of just do weeding and all of a sudden you go, oh, and you pull what you shouldn't have pulled, right? Which is it's uprooting something that was so delicate and so tender. So the process of weeding out what is not helpful, right? In Sanskrit, it would be called anarthas, which is like, this is not something that I'm trying to foster. This is counter to what I'm trying to foster. This is unhelpful, right? What would traditionally be in like the Abrahamic traditions known as sin. Sin means like it's a miss. Like you were aiming for the one thing and you missed. And so that miss, it's sin, right? So it's like, oh man, that's not really what I was going for. So those are the weeds that we're trying to carefully uproot. Now there's a intrapersonal version of that, which is my own shortcomings, my own ego traps, my own conditioning, my own kind of sore spots, my trauma, right? And then there's the interpersonal garden. And that's kind of where I feel like there's so much beautiful work that can be done. The interpersonal garden is, you are cultivating your small creeper. I'm trying to cultivate my small creeper, and so on and so forth. And we're all in this beautiful garden of community. And like these weeds are growing. And we have to be so careful to carefully, take those weeds out without disturbing the plants that are growing. So the whole premise of that, and there's beautiful literature on this in our faith, and we don't necessarily have the time to really dig into the texts as much, but one of the things that we are usually warned about, right? And they say that this is kind of nothing can really halt the progress of our devotion, right? Because it's something that's not material. It's actually something that's not even in our control. If it was, I mean, imagine what that would be like. It's not even really in our control. It's coming as a gift of grace. So there's nothing really that can halt our spiritual growth, even if it seems to be happening very, very slowly, like that creeper growing. But what can make us feel like, okay, I have lost access, or I'm not able to, feel, or it doesn't feel like I'm going deep, or I'm stuck, or I'm in a rut, our teachers indicate that the one trap that can kind of get us in that stuck place is offenses. So now, of course, none of us really want to think like, oh, I'm offending people. I'm behaving offensively, or and largely we're not doing any of what we do consciously, right? In fact, relationship theorists, they say that a big majority of our behavior, unless we are really making a concerted effort to make it otherwise, happens unconsciously, right? Our body language, our tone of voice, even the things that we say, a lot of it is like habitual, a lot of it is conditioning, and a lot of it is not like a conscious choice. So to become sentient, to become conscious, right? It takes quite a lot of effort, because the momentum of material energy is to just kind of do things in an offline way. Material energy is so dense and so heavy, it actually taxes the consciousness. It actually taxes the consciousness to like stay alert and alive just by the weight of it. Like here we live, Damodar Priya and I, and probably other people here in the group, we live in North Central Florida, where there's like a kind of wall of humidity every time you walk out the door. Like you'll just be in your nice, cool home and you walk out and you're like, oh, and you're like just covered in this thick air. It's just so dense that even when you go for a walk, you're like, oh, it feels like you're really, there's like a heaviness to like even walking and like a dampening. And so that's kind of what material nature is on an energetic, on a psychic, and even a spiritual level. It's like there's like such a dampening. There's such a dampening. And it affects how we operate in the world. So it takes so much energy, especially at the beginning, to kind of become conscious, even though that's our natural state, that's our permanent state, that it's just kind of you go with the momentum, right? Um, and it's easier to kind of stay in that automatic state. So to flip on and say like, wait a minute, actually, and this is again, it's by the blessings of a well-wisher that we even get a chance to choose. I choose to be online. I choose to be awake. I choose to be conscious. Let me try another way. Right. And so for that, that's why we always offer prayers to our teachers before any endeavor. That's why, there's in the songs that we sing in the morning during our morning program in the Bhakti faith, we say we offer our obeisances, our prostrations to our teacher 3 times a day, because it's just like as a matter of routine, it's nice to check in and go, oh my gosh, because of their grace, I'm even able to make the choice to like wake up today. Right. So it's such a blessing. So as we're kind of working on these offenses, so to speak, we need to not only be conscious of things that we don't want to do, but also have the chance to recalibrate and say, well, where do I want to go? What is it that I'm aiming for? Okay, I don't want to just not offend people. I don't want to just not commit offenses towards other devotees or other spiritual practitioners. What would this look like in the positive? Right? Especially because ours is a faith of loving devotional service, which means I'm not just trying to look at finding peace of mind. I'm not just looking for the relief from material suffering, even material suffering in my relationships. I'm looking towards something positive. I'm trying to build something. I'm trying to grow something. So recently, we have a women's group here and we do some reading. And one of the books that we're reading is a beautiful book called All About Love. And it's written by this fantastic author. She's a feminist and she advocates towards social change. And her whole philosophy is building community and relationships and also personal well-being through an ethic of love. That's her language, an ethic of love. And she quotes M. Scott Peck, who wrote a very famous seminal book called The Road Less Traveled. And she quotes him for his definition of love. And she says that actually there's very imprecise language around love. So when you're trying to do relationships, there's sort of becomes like well, this is love for you and this is love for me and this and we don't really get taught like how do you love? What is loving another person look like? Right? And sometimes we'll get caught up in a very kind of compartmentalized conception of love, which is maybe romantic love or yeah, kind of that idyllic, we might have gotten it from media or from books or from examples, positive or negative in our upbringing. And so we start kind of just confabulating, like just fantasizing what love could be. And it might not actually be something that resonates and it might not be something we've ever really felt before, right? And so it's interesting to kind of approximate a definition. So the definition that she provides in the book that's quoted from M. Scott Peck, she says that love is the will to extend oneself to nurture our own or another's spiritual growth. And I'll say that again because it's such a phenomenal, there's like so many layers and it seems like every word was very carefully chosen by this person. Love is the will to extend oneself to nurture one's own or another's spiritual growth. And I thought, man, this harmonizes with every path of devotion on such a profound level, right? Just the fact that it's okay, the will to extend oneself. That means it's a choice. That means that there has to be consciousness. It means that there has to be some sense of self-responsibility. It's not an automatic feeling. It's not some sentiment. It's a willingness, right? There's an attitude shift in that. There's like a forward lean in that. The will to extend oneself. And extend oneself, that next part of the definition, I think that's fabulous because when you extend yourself by nature, you're moving outside of your comfort zone. And I think anybody that's ever experienced love can attest to the fact that they either felt someone was able to move beyond their comfort zone for us, and the gratitude and the connection and the solidarity that one experiences with that, or that once ourselves, that we were challenged to move outside of our comfort zone for another. So it's an extension. It means that there's a growth, there's an expansion of whatever I regularly inhabit. And then it says to nurture one's own or another's spiritual growth. So that means I can love myself. I need to love myself. That means I can choose to move out of my own comfort zone for me. That's phenomenal, because a lot of times I feel like keeping my comfort zone comfy and fluffing up my comfort zone and furnishing my comfort zone and protecting my comfort zone is what I might define as self-love. Is what I might define as self-love. And probably during my upbringing, especially if I had a difficult childhood, if there was trauma, if I didn't see loving relationships modeled, if I was isolated, even if there were like important like social or even natural events, right? Because trauma is not just what happens between people, it's also what's happening in the world, right? Like what's happening now. There's tons of traumatic stuff happening now. Those things might fracture the sense of safety that I feel. And so, because that safety is challenged and safety comes before any other need, my first instinct might be to create protection. And so, expanding out of my comfort zone might not even be a fathomable idea, because my comfort zone needs to be protected first, because I need to generate safety. So it's not that any of these things are problematic in and of themselves, but when we get to where we are now, which is, being curious about, okay, loving relationships, we should know that once safety has been established, right? And even then, I think that there's an interesting challenge there, because as yogis, we have access to wisdom texts that are informing us that our sense of safety in the material world is constantly being challenged. Constantly being challenged. It's not really realistic, right? Safety is relative. It's relative to the material world where everything is in a constant state of flux, right? That's one of the key differences between what is eternal and what is temporary, is that what is temporary is always changing. And what is eternal is permanent. It's in a steady state. And so our safety is always going to be relative, and it's going to have to be held simultaneously to this deeper truth, which is nothing is truly safe in a world that's always changing and shifting. Nothing material is ever safe. Let's say it that way. Nothing material is ever safe. Nothing external is ever safe in a world that's constantly shifting and changing. So once that safety, or safety, I'll say it in air quotes, is somewhat established, then I have the freedom to be able to consider, okay, how do I extend outside of my comfort zone? And the first person who needs to challenge that comfort zone is me, for myself, right? To nurture my own spiritual growth. And then to do it for another, which means their spiritual growth might look really different, might feel really different than what I would consider to be, benchmarks for my own spiritual growth. And that's part of the kind of the understanding that we'll get into in a second. So I really appreciated this definition. And I feel that it and in and of itself could be its own meditation. What does this mean to me? And I encourage you all to take this definition and really kind of break it down for yourselves. Use it as a way of meditating. Yeah, if I was going to generate the will to extend myself, to nourish my own spiritual growth, what would that look like? What do I consider to even be spiritual growth? And then for another, and it might just be one other, right? It's going to be difficult to tackle this across the kind of global everyone that I know that I would like to love, but maybe even just considering one other person whose spiritual growth I really feel invested in, and what would it look like to extend myself in a way where I could love myself and then love that person. And that kind of gets into the territory of boundary work, which is, outside the scope of our thing today, but it's an interesting meditation. It's been something that's on my mind as well, so I wanted to share it with the group. I always feel like I'm kind of like I don't know, yeah, like a student, and then I'll like find something cool, and I'm like, oh my God, and I bring it to the group, like, look what I found. And it's not that I know, but I just found something really cool and I want to share it with you. So that's kind of what I'm feeling with you all, which is like, I don't know exactly, but I found this thing, and I found this thing, and I found this other thing, and like, look, you guys. So that's the excitement that I want to share with you all, I guess. So bell hooks what she does is that she takes this definition and then she breaks it down into some elements that I think could be a really beautiful meditation. A really beautiful meditation, again, bringing it back to this premise of like, okay, we're all in our own way, perhaps, watering the seed of our devotional creeper. And I know that I don't want to commit offenses. I know that I don't want to harm others. But to do no harm is not enough. It's not enough if what we're trying to cultivate is devotion. What I want to do is actually grow love. I want to cultivate love, right? And in so many places, in the Bhakti text, it says that God, Goddess, they consider that even higher than worship of themselves is worship of the ones that they love and worship of the ones that love them, right? And so if we're considering, the possibility of universal brotherhood, universal sisterhood, that means that that starts with whoever I have in my immediate proximity, right? Because on a theological basis, I want to have the conviction that everybody is a lover of God and Goddess in their truest potential. So my love, right, the way that I want to approximate love towards God, Goddess, is by starting with the people that they've gifted me with in this immediate moment, in this surrounding, the people that are in my life right now. So let's start with some of the elements that Bell Hooks provides in their literature, specifically in this book. So they say that it comes down to these, I think there's seven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, 7 elements, components that make up love, right? And so I'll go through them one by one. The first one is care. And again, it's one of these words that like you throw around a lot, you hear them a lot, and then it's nice to have like a precise definition. So Bell Hooks says it's a deep concern and attentiveness to another's well-being. So sometimes the examples of this are going to be like if someone falls ill, it could be like wondering if they're okay, offering to bring medicines. It's kind of the basics of like food, shelter, safety, education. So if we're thinking kind of family of origin, what it's like to grow up in a home, care is usually the things that we're kind of socially aware of, right? They're the things that are the kind of basic building blocks of like safety and, let's say, physical and basic mental emotional well-being. Care means like no harm, a sense of safety, a sense of provision, right? And so, yeah, in a relationship with a friend, you can imagine what that would look like. A friendship between two adults might be like, hey, are you doing okay? How are you feeling? I heard you were under the weather. How's your job been? So it's basically like a sense of orientation towards another's well-being and a concern for that. That would be care. So the next element that Bell Hooks brings in is commitment. And this is great because in modern times, commitment is also something that's being kind of defined and redefined and deconstructed and reconstructed. And we're trying to see like, okay, what does commitment mean, right? It's a dedication to the loving relationship and to the partner. So it's interesting because also in relationship therapy, we hear that there's like this other entity that is created when I engage in a relationship with another person, especially if it's like an intimate partnership, like a committed partnership. Um, there's me and there's the other person, and then there's the relationship itself. Like the container itself becomes its own kind of living entity that has its own special needs, that are not quite just my needs and not quite the other person's needs, but somehow like a symbiosis of both and its own like energetic thing, has its own pulse. So when she's talking about commitment, she's saying it's a dedication to that relationship, to that container as its own kind of thing in and of itself, and to the partner. So also acknowledging the otherness or the separateness of the individual, right? The separateness of the individual. And there's a lot of literature that supports, especially now, that otherness is necessary, right? It's like the antidote to a codependent relationship is interdependence, which means I'm me, you are you, and there's an us that exists. But neither are we enveloped by that us and like totally consumed and absorbed by it, nor are we like totally rigid and distanced from it. It's like there's a little bit of like a permeability there that doesn't challenge the individuality or the autonomy of either party. So commitment is that dance. Commitment is like there has to be a certain constancy. There has to be a certain constancy for certain things to unfold over time. And I get this question a lot in my clinical work is, like, is there really merit to a long-term committed relationship, right? And my my position is yes, because there are some things that are only revealed in time. There are things that are only revealed in time. And if that constancy, if that commitment doesn't play out using that resource of time, right? Time is an ingredient. It's a cosmic ingredient, right? From our especially the Bhakti faith, it has the Vedic kind of cosmology and Vedic creation theology, and time is an ingredient. It's not just like something that we're subjected to in terms of like, oh, we're victims of time, or it's like some uncontrollable thing. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, I am time. So it's like, it's even the way that divinity is expressed. So having that divine ingredient be something in a relationship, it allows for certain revelations that are not accessible if that ingredient is not there. So that's that commitment piece. So I'll move on to the third ingredient. The third ingredient is knowledge, a desire to know and understand the other person deeply and thoroughly. So this knowledge is kind of, we would probably include empathy in this element, right? Empathy meaning knowledge, not just knowledge in a intellectual way, like, oh, I know this person, I know their biography, and I know their upbringing story, and I've met their family, and I know. Knowledge means I have the capacity to hold back my projections based on my reality and hear, acknowledge, and reflect your reality as true, right? And so that knowledge, it comes again from time spent. It comes also from enduring hardship. Like you really get to know somebody when you've been through a difficulty with them, right? Whether you've been through a difficulty together as a team or the difficulty is like with them, you really get to know somebody. You really get to know somebody, and you get to know somebody over time, including the ways in which they change and evolve, right? Sometimes once we feel like we know somebody, then we go, aha, and we've like captured a snapshot of them, and then we hold them to that for the rest of eternity, basically. It's like, I know you. Okay, I know you, then I got you. Like, I've captured you because it's so challenging. I can imagine, this is perhaps my speculation, but for a spirit soul that is actually inherently eternal, the concept of something like shifting and changing and being not constant and falling away and transforming, it must be very unsettling. It must be very unsettling, right? And so I think that there's a certain sense of wanting, like almost desperately, to know somebody and just crystallize them there and just keep them there and say, this is who you are. Now I know. And now I feel safe and I can kind of move on with and that's actually very problematic because we're not even acknowledging that we ourselves are changing, even as the observer or witness to another. While we're watching another do their thing, we ourselves are changing in all manner of ways. And if we're not changing consciously, then that means we're changing unconsciously, which is, you can imagine how dangerous that might be. So knowledge means not just a desire to know and understand the other person, but for it to be deep and for it to be thorough, and also to maintain a certain sense of, I probably won't ever be able to know another completely. And that other is changing and is allowed to change, as am I. But the desire, the effort, the willingness to go deep and to be thorough, meaning that there's not an aspect of them that I'm unwilling to look at least with a disposition of curiosity, if not maybe like affection and care. Okay, so then responsibility. And I love that this one follows up the other one, right? Which is it's a willingness to take accountability for one's actions and for the relationship, right? So that means there has to be a pretty decent sense, right? These are also the definitions for loving oneself. So if I know myself, it means that there are also not like little nooks and crannies where I'm unwilling to look at my own responsibility, my own actions, my own contribution, the way in which I might be creating some tension or creating some difficulty or fostering an environment that doesn't feel conducive to these very tender creepers of love and relationship that are budding, right? And so taking responsibility means that the state of the relationship is something that I have also added my ingredients to. It also has my signature energy on there. And what does that mean, right? It also means responsibility for the things that I've contributed in the positive sense, right? Because again, we want to be taking a look at, what do I want to continue to foster? What is there a little bit of that maybe there could be a lot of, and that would be really helpful. So that knowledge piece and the responsibility piece, I don't want to necessarily frame it as, something that's negative or that we're looking for faults necessarily, although I think that that's important. There's this basic understanding of, I'm a fallible human in a relationship with another fallible human. But let's take a look at, like, what's really happening in this container. What's really happening in this container. So that responsibility piece is there. So the next one, this is 5 of 7, is respect. So she defines this as a deep appreciation for the inherent worth and autonomy of another person. So that kind of gets to that otherness I was talking about previously. A deep appreciation. So it's not like, yeah, I respect you, you respect me. Like there's like this kind of tense, um, maybe intellectual acknowledgement of like, you are another person, I am another person. It's like, no, this is something that runs deep. Respect from a place of value, right? I'm valuing that someone else is inherently worthy and they're inherently autonomous. And this is really important, especially when we come into conflict, because in conflict, we might feel our own self-worth is being challenged, right? Or we might struggle with seeing another's worth because their actions affect us. But there has to be a kind of foundational understanding that whatever problems arise between two people or within a family or within a community, that their inherent worth is unchallenged. And the only thing that can really justify that, it can't really be material. It has to be spiritual. Right? At minimum, it's metaphysical, because what makes anybody worthy? It's like very hard to pinpoint a material qualification, a material standard, a material substance that makes anybody inherently worthy. What makes someone inherently worthy is their spiritual material, right? It's the fact that they're a conscious, sentient, living being. And from a philosophical point of view, if you adhere to a faith practice, to a devotional practice, it's because they are part of God. And God is a part of them. So that kind of implicit divinity is what we're acknowledging when we say you are inherently worthy and also inherently autonomous. It means that that person is on their own journey. That person's on their own path. They have their own devotion, or they're on their own spiritual journey. And it might be a complete enigma to me. I might have zero capacity to grasp or like understand really what's going on there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that because there's a gap in my knowledge that it challenges in any way their autonomy. And recognizing another's autonomy, by the way, is one of the fastest ways to get another in their uh, position of power and responsibility. Because autonomy acknowledges, like, you as an adult, let's say, there's obviously going to be different when you're in a relationship with children, but even with children, there's a way of respecting autonomy. There's a selfhood that is very important to respect. So that's that respect piece. The next one is trust, which, of course, in any relationship conversation, this is going to be like a big, important, heavy word. So trust is defined as a firm reliance on the other person's integrity and faithfulness. Firm reliance. Like, imagine what that feels like, even in your body. Like when I say that out loud, I have a feeling in my body, a firm reliance on another person's integrity. And now imagine what that feels like if you were to describe yourself as trustworthy, right? If you were going to say, yes, I'm someone that you can engage in a loving relationship with because I can offer you trust. Trust means that I have to be able to offer my own integrity as something that another can lean on. And integrity, we mean congruence. Congruence means that I have values, and those values align with my thought process. They align with my language, the way that I express myself in the world. They align in my actions, the way that I move in the world, right? Like one of the questions that Arjuna asks to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is like, how does a yogi sit? And how does a yogi speak? And how does a yogi move? Like how does one operate in the world? Because it's implicit that, whatever your internal realization is going to express itself in the way that you operate in the world. And so this trust is basically, without your 100% knowledge of someone's inner world, which is not something that we necessarily can aim for, There's something in their behavior, there's something in the way they carry themselves, something in the way they speak, something in what you see via the knowledge and commitment, something that is revealed with knowledge and with time and interaction that inspires you to have a firm reliance on the other person's integrity. And by the way, when someone doesn't trust you, you can feel that. You can feel when someone doesn't trust you, when the reliance is not firm, right? And so that's important to take a look at, which is not only, who is worthy of my trust, which is usually the position we're coming from, right? Who's really deserving of my trust? Are you trustworthy? Are you trustworthy? And that's a very valid question. And then the reverse would also be an interesting contemplation. What makes me trustworthy? And do I know how to firmly rely on someone when I found someone who's trustworthy? What might be a barrier between my firm reliance on someone and them actually being trustworthy, right? Even if we found this person who is congruent, who is coherent, who is integrated, do I have the capacity? It's like a big ask. There's quite a lot of vulnerability there in actually relying firmly on another, So that's also something to learn in this practice of love. And then this last element is honest and open communication. And again, these are all huge topics. It's just kind of laying out the landscape because I really love, it's a very, I feel like dynamic, multifaceted definition. So honest and open communication is the ability to express oneself truthfully and listen openly, right? So when you get into like reflective listening practices, which, there's a lot of literature and information about that, it's a willingness to allow for another's vulnerability and to respond with our own vulnerability. Basically, it's saying if there is a willingness to engage, implicit in that willingness to engage is the fact that we're both taking a huge risk, to be honest. And that risk is acknowledged. Like it's not nothing. It's not downplayed that in honest, open communication, the other person is essentially like expressing themselves in a way that is risky to the relationship, and that I'm doing the same, that even my listening is risky, and that's an offering that I can give unto the relationship, unto the container of the relationship. My willingness to hear something that I may or may not like to hear, that might be a critique, that might make me see myself differently or see another differently, yeah, I'm willing to go there. I'm willing to experience that, right? It takes quite a lot of courage. All of these things require so much courage, right? And that's why often we feel so challenged to love, because it's asking quite a lot from us. So those are the kind of 7 elements that she brings in. And I think that it's an interesting meditation because it gives us the capacity to start to look at in a very specific way if there are areas in our loving relationships. And it doesn't, again, I would discourage anyone from being like, all right, I'm going to take inventory of all my relations and see what you could do this really with just one person and say, okay, like if I was really going to break down, like, am I showing up in love? Do I operate in this relationship with an ethic of love? How do I know? And then holding myself to this standard. That practice is enough. That's enough to potentially shift in a really important way any given relationship. And then also to be able to take a look at in an honest way, but also in a way where we're perhaps giving the other person the benefit of the doubt, which is a very generous position, is to say, do I feel loved by this person? And let me run it through these 7 kind of concepts or categories and see where I feel like, okay, here it feels really strong, and here I feel like we could use some work, and here, and then addressing it in terms of that container. Neither you nor I, but what we create together, nourishing that container, right? And so I feel like it's a helpful schema. It's a helpful schema to kind of look at, okay, when we talk about love, which is like this huge concept, how do we engage with it directly? And why would we do that, right? Why would we do that? Well, because I have some faith that I'm not just going to magically be able to jump all of my relationships and go directly into engaging with divinity in a loving way without ever having practice, right? And that's the concept of sadhana. Sadhana, what it means, it's a Sanskrit term that essentially means you are emulating something. It's an emulation. You are going through the motions and getting familiar with the practice of something. And then through grace, through prayer, through love and dedication and service, little by little, there's a refinement of your practice until all of a sudden you're not doing these things mechanically and you're not doing these things out of a sense of emulation. You're doing them out of genuine taste, like something feels sweet there. Something is intentional and something is magnetic, and now you're being pulled into it, right? And so and that's when it goes, that's the concept of raganuga. Raganuga means now I'm doing it because I can't not do it. Now I'm doing it because I'm like helplessly attracted to this. And so in that way we kind of get pulled into our relationship with divinity, but it only makes sense that if I believe that there's intention, that there's purpose to the relationships in which I'm placed, right? Like my little bhakti lata, my little seed of devotion is planted in this garden amidst all these other, is there a sense of cooperation? Is there a sense of purpose? Is this intentional? My being arranged within this, field of other practitioners? And how do I practice love so that I embody love, so that I'm really practicing what I profess, right? Loving devotional service. What does that actually look like? So it has a practical aspect. It also has this esoteric aspect, which is, if we really understand sambandha, which means like our connection to everything. Sambandha means like, how am I connected to anything and everything, right? There's basically like God, goddess, the living entity, and material nature. That's like the divine triangle, right? And so you can't really work on just two planes of that triangle and really call it connection. Connection means all three elements of that have to be honored in any given relationship. And so this is, I think, where Bhakti Yoga contributes something so powerful to relationships, because it could be enough to say, yeah, I have healthy relationships in this life. I love other people. They love me. But to take it to that next dimension, right? To take it to the transpersonal dimension, which is not just what's happening here in this realm, but really connecting it to my spirit and really connecting it to divinity and really connecting it to my eternal purpose, right? What we call Sanatana Dharma, which is like, what am I actually meant to be doing? And it's connecting to divinity through love. Then I also have to include a loving relationship with divinity. And much of that is going to be acknowledging, like we said at the way beginning, the dimension, like the magnitude of God, goddess's love that already exists, and tapping into that. And we can actually request, beg, petition God, goddess to be present and to work in our relationships with us, right? So an intercessory prayer. Intercessory prayer means you please work on my behalf because this is too much for me, right? If I haven't been shown love, if I haven't been taught love, if the world itself is not structured in a way to foster love, like if we look at the world around us, it's very rare to find an environment that just automatically fosters love and just like supports it, because everything is in flux and because there's so much fear, and fear is such a counter element to love. Fear is such an obstacle to love. So when you see exploitation and you see war and you see, genocide, and you see, the exploitation of women or children, and that is fear. It's just an ethic of fear rather than what bell hooks would define an ethic of love. So if the environment is not, so then what do we do? Like, it's beyond our power. It would only be natural for us to like operate on some basic modicum of like humility and seeing the scale and the scope and being like, I can't take all this on. That's impossible. And so it's, yeah, we're not meant to do it alone. We're meant to do it with others. We're meant to do it in community. And we're ultimately meant to depend on divinity to carry us, right? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, he says, I preserve what you have. Like, your work is worthy and necessary. You have to commit to the work. But I carry what you lack, which is like, the lack is implicit. He's not saying like, if you lack something, then I'll have, he's like, what you lack, which we all know, right? It's definitely there. I carry that, right? And so it's also very soothing, and it's also very validating to acknowledge the presence of divinity in our relationships, especially the ones where we may feel challenged, and to really pray in a concerted way and say, you know what, please carry what I lack. There's so much I'm lacking. Please intercede. So I'll take this moment, since we're here, to maybe let us join some breakout rooms and we can have a discussion based on this element. I know there's been like a lot of content, and of course, anything that you want to discuss is valid and beautiful and helpful. So please like dig into anywhere where it feels like, oh, this feels really juicy or really alive for me right now. But I wanted everyone to maybe ponder these two questions. One is, have I ever experienced a power greater than myself, seemingly intervening or supporting during a difficulty in relationships? Right? So something where you know, like, that wasn't me. But I don't think that was the other person either. Like somehow we were held. Somehow there was some magic that happened there that was like beyond me and this other person or me in this situation. This could also be in our relationship with ourselves. So have I ever experienced a power greater than myself seemingly intervening or supporting during a difficulty in my relationship with myself? Like, did I feel like divinity was actually present, some higher power like actually intervening? And the second question is, what would shift in my relationships if I had full faith that my higher power was intimately involved in supporting me and the other person? So kind of demystifying this higher power that's like far off and away and has no kind of vested interest in any of what's going on with you personally, and they're just like very detached and aloof. And there's a lot of theism that starts to come out in our relationships, because how we act and how we move in the world will also necessarily be an expression of how we think our source is, because we're part of them and they're a part of us. And so it's going to be reflected in our behavior as well. So what would shift in my relationship? How would something change if I had full faith, right? That trust piece, strong reliance that my higher power was intimately involved in supporting me and the other person in the relationship. So I'll leave these two questions for your contemplation.
Okay, so welcome back everyone to our Q&A and reflection section. This is our opportunity to ask some specific questions of Dhanya that may be on your mind, or if you have any reflections from your breakout rooms, things that inspired you, things that made you kind of think about, then this is the time to do it. So please either raise a virtual hand or just let me know in the chat if you would like me to share on your behalf. Okay, I'm so I think our little friend Dominic is a little confused. He Dominic's had me he's with Nicole in my Krishna Kids Zoom classes, so I think thought I was asking him to volunteer. I think this is just for the mommies, Dominic. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have anybody raising their virtual hand yet. So I did have a question that was sent before. So we had folks asking if you could specifically state what's the name of the book that you've been referencing. And just again, just repeat where those 7 principles are coming from, which I think answers that question, right?
Yeah. So the author, their name is Bell, Bell, Hooks, Hooks, and the book's name is All About Love. I think there's a subheading, but I don't know what it is. But the name of the book is All About Love.
Great. And that's the one that I put in the chat. So I'm glad that I had it
Right.
right. Okay, great. Oh, Kelly, please unmute yourself and reflect or ask a question.
I am just, Dhanya, thank you so much. This answered my prayer. This was my interceding prayer, and by Krishna's grace, just thank you so much. And this is really it. Like, how do we love? How do we trust? How do we put fear aside? And I'm just so grateful. And to the beautiful souls that shared in our group, I just am so floored by people's longing and how I'm so inspired, even when suffering, to be able to reach out and touch another's heart. It's just so beautiful. So thank you so much. And I have a ton of questions, but my brain's not really working. So I just want to express love and gratitude.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And yes, and that is something that we can also do is express our love and gratitude. But we have our dear Nicole here with Dominic. Yeah, please, Nicole, unmute yourself.
Haribol, thank you so much. Okay, can I speak for a second, please? Thank you. Dhanya, thank you so much for the class. I always love hearing you talk. I have a question because like I'm reading through these 7 pillars and I'm like, yes, this is what I want in all of my relationships. And like I feel like I'm ready to give those things. But like what do you suggest when it seems like the majority of the relationships in your life, you're not getting this from people? Like how do you like decipher how to show up in those relationships? And then two, like, is it to what extent, like, a question that I'll ask myself sometimes is like, am I being too picky in who I'm choosing to keep as a close friend? Like, what if it means that I have less association in my life? You know what I mean? Like, where is the balance of like you're finding amazing people who can meet all these things, or you're not finding amazing people? So then how do you still show up and like be in relationship with people?
Hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that question so much, and I think that this is definitely, it's a challenge. Hearing two elements to your share. One is, yeah, I might be willing and have the hope to foster all of this, and what if I'm not met with that same clarity of intention? And what if that doesn't feel like it's really showing up from the other party? And that kind of leads into the second question, which is like, what is the discernment of like who gets to be in my life if this is the ethic that I really want to live? And the author does get into that in the book. I really encourage it as a read. I think it's really informative. Um, so to the first part, again, if there's a faith that informs your lifestyle and that informs your personal practice, that intercessory prayer might be twofold, meaning, you know, when I offer my whatever these 7 pillars are, I'm offering them because I want to grow love in the relationship, but also because I understand that me practicing this is going to grow my heart's capacity, right? It's me actually like doing it because I believe that it's what's right to do. It's how I actually want to show up in relationships. So the principle of integrity, right, that we talked about there in the trustworthiness. My own integrity means I'm living these values, not necessarily with a specific result intended, although of course we want to foster closeness and intimacy and nurturing in relationships, but on a principle level, I'm operating this way in relationship because I believe it to be true. I believe it to be right action. So that's might be step one, which is like, how do I gather the strength to be like this without the certainty that another will respond? Now, if another is not responding in this way, depending on where the relationship is at, it might be helpful even to talk about this, right? And may be able to bring these pillars, let's say you're working with this as a template for like, okay, this is interesting work. These are interesting ideas. If the relationship has sufficient room in it, which we would hope there would be, to even just have a discussion about this and say, truthfulness, trust, knowledge, care, like, let's talk about where these might be at in our relationship. How do you feel? How do I feel? That might be a really cool conversation to have to gauge, like, are we on the same page about wanting this to happen this way? Right? And so this author actually, she has this really cool other concept that she brings in. It's called cathexis. Cathexis, which is, I guess, is based on a Greek word, I would imagine from the sound of it. So cathexis, she makes a distinction between cathexis and love. And she says that cathexis is when we feel drawn to a person or that person is like in our life and we invest feelings and emotions into that person. But that's not necessarily love. It just means there's a bunch of feelings there. And it's almost like a mental thing or like a karmic thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean love is what's being grown there. She's saying love is like an intentional thing. It's not like, oh, I felt, let's say in a romantic partnership, I felt a spark and kind of the stars aligned, then all of a sudden there's like this chemistry, and then now like we're like living together. That could all be cathexis, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's love. And I'm sure that we all can think of one or more relationships in our life, whether it was a parent or a friend or a teacher or a community member or an intimate partner with whom we can now reflect like maybe it was a more cathectic love and not a love, right? Not this deep, profound, abiding love that we're really aiming for, and it's aspirational. It's not like, oh, I love you, check. Like it ticks all 7 boxes, like we got it. Again, it's like a living practice. So that being said, if that conversation is not available, or you see like, yeah, this person doesn't necessarily want to operate within these ideas, within these values of where I really want to take this relationship, like where I think this relationship can go, then I think it would be really healthy to explore the idea of, well, to love and to be loved is quite a privilege. And it might be a privilege that not everybody is equipped for at this time. And without any judgment, right? Oh, because this person's immature, because this person's not ready for love, and I'm too much for them, and my love is overwhelming them, and they're traumatized, without getting into like building a story around it. Simply recognizing, like, this is not where that person is at. And still there's intercession that you can pray for. I pray that this person does experience love. I pray that this person can receive love from me. And in order to love myself, which is part of that definition of love, maybe I need to care for myself by being more selective with my association. Maybe I need to know myself deeply and realize like there are other requirements that I have for people that I spend a lot of time with, or I really deeply open myself up to, because I'm not feeling that trust or I'm not feeling that open communication. So it might be outside of my comfort zone, right? This is using all the same language and definitions that are being used in today's discussion. Maybe it's outside of my comfort zone to reevaluate my association. But maybe that's what I have to do to extend myself towards my own spiritual growth. So it's not easy work. This is like super heavy lifting. There's all kinds of like fluffy things about love and what we're trying to do here and blah blah. But like, if we really take a look at it, this is a tall order, right? It's no small task. It's impossible to overstate the depth and the magnitude of this work. And sometimes, what we're looking at, to use that same gardening metaphor, sometimes you look at a plant and there has to be like some pruning. And it's not a judgment. Oh, I can't believe this plant grew these leaves. I can't. It's just like, oh, I'm seeing that in order for this to grow, it needs to shed some weight. It needs to like be able to kind of lift off and create, altitude and expand itself. And this is not facilitating that growth. And it doesn't have to come from a place of self-righteousness, which often we might weaponize some of our spiritual tools or our knowledge or our self-work that in a way that sort of like fosters a sense of self-righteousness. That is the opposite energy of gratitude and humility, which we want to always kind of be growing because those nourish the soil of bhakti. It would come from a place of true humility. Wow, like I'm humbly realizing like this might not be a relationship where I can really get all of these needs met, where I am really able to foster this environment. And I think that's why often in our wisdom texts we hear of this balance between, really creating an offering, right? The yukta, like let me see how I can tailor this to my spiritual life, and the vairagya, which is like, I'm not sure that this is a useful ingredient right now, and I'm going to need to take some space. And you see, people have their personal practices. People, I think, and Rukmini Prabhu is so much senior to myself. She might be able to attest to the fact that as one matures spiritually, one becomes, I wouldn't say picky because that was a word that was thrown out there, but much more selective. One treasures much more the association that does meet all these requirements. And so we prioritize that association. It becomes very precious, right? And so there's like a process of being very selective and realizing the luxury, the treasure that it is to like love and be loved, and that might be very few people, right? Brene Brown, she does research on shame and resilience. She's like a super famous author. I love her a lot. I quote her a lot. She says that the names of everyone that you love and trust, like on the deepest level in this lifetime, you should be able to write all their names on a 1 by 1 square of paper. So a 1 by 1 square of paper is like that big. Everybody's name. That's like not a lot of names. So keeping that in mind, it's like, yeah, it's what in the Nectar of Instruction is referred to as guhyam akyati prichati, which is like, who do you really reveal your innermost like spiritual heart to? And it's like a very small, very small. So I think it's also easing off the pressure of like, this is going to be it's like, it may just be one or two people in this whole life. And I think that becomes whittled down as we become specific and intentional about what these relationships need to be. So I hope that was helpful. It's kind of what comes to mind when I think about it, because I've also had kind of the similar questions.
Thank you, Dhanya, and thank you, Nicole, for that question. And I think we have time for just one more question or reflection from Becca. So Becca, please go ahead.
I think you may have answered the question right there, but
okay.
I'm a little newer to Bhakti, and I think the questions were beautiful and they opened up amazing conversation with those in my breakout room, and I'm really grateful for it. But I think the thing that I struggle with, and maybe this is part two of a session or inherent in my learnings, is it's easy for me to give up that control and understand that, devotional love in the one-to-one, and these concepts. But when you look to the external world and things that you were talking about before that go on in the macro, right, that just seem, how can there be love in that? And in some of these mass things going on, how do you apply these concepts to your day to day and love the things that you see externally? I guess I'll leave it there.
Yeah,
A little confusing of a question, but
no, I think
I'm trying
it's
to verbalize it right.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, and I think it's relevant, and I think that any rational sentient being who's like tuned in would naturally pose a question of like, yeah, it's all well and good in your little container, but like really, I mean, look at the world. How do we love that? And I think that um, I was reading recently a quote, and I want to say that it was, oh, I can't remember who was saying it. It was some Christian mystic, and I feel so sad that I can't remember who exactly it was. But they were saying, how they were asking them, like, how do I pray for a Hitler? How do I pray for a Stalin? Like, if I'm really going to direct my prayers towards these people, how do I do it? And he was kind of saying like a two-step thing. One is to say, I have to somehow recognize that despite everything, they are also like part and parcel of divinity. That wasn't exactly the language, but it was basically saying like somehow they also have their right relationship with God somewhere, and it's buried underneath all this hatred and bigotry and discrimination and xenophobia and everything that we see that is like the fear ethic in the world. So one is acknowledging that ontologically, they also belong to divinity. And the second part of the prayer was to recognize in myself where some fraction of what they do exists in me. Where I fear another, where I discriminate, where I judge, where I'm aggressive, where I'm violent, where I'm resentful, where I'm, right? And it might not look like a large scale genocide, which we have every right to be horrified about. We have every right to be horrified by the state of things. But to recognize, like, okay, how can I pray? Because really, the only thing we can do when the scale is so large is pray. But how can I pray in a genuine way? Well, it's to recognize, like, yeah, some threat to my goodness could also exist via some version of that within myself. So, to respond in prayer to the things that are overwhelming, like that's been the practice of any practitioner of any faith since time immemorial. There are things beyond my scope, and the only thing that I can offer is a genuine prayer. That seems like the most reasonable thing to do in the world. And that might be all the love that we're able to offer. Right? So it's basically saying like, yeah, I don't know how to say, oh, knowledge. Oh, the more that I know about what's going on in Gaza, or the more that I know what's going on about what's going in Sudan, or the oppression of women, or child trafficking, like, okay, so maybe you try and then you're totally demoralized and totally deflated and disappointed by what's going on. Of course, that would be the only natural reaction for someone of a soft, sensitive heart. Of course. And so then that's when you kind of commend your heart and commend yourself to divinity and say, I just show me how to show up. And so that piece, right, the responsibility, which is which is, well, if I could scan the area, scan this topic, scan for a way in which I can become responsible. That might just be like raising children who are not xenophobic. That's a huge contribution to the thing I'm seeing right now. Right? And maybe I'm like watering a tree whose shade I won't sit under, right? But that's my contribution. That's how I become responsible. Maybe it's a donation, maybe it's service, maybe it's food distribution, maybe it's prayer, maybe it's, offering some sort of emotional support. Who knows? But that we can love by figuring out, yeah, how do I show up in whatever way I can, and then being real about the power of prayer and saying, yeah, sometimes that prayer piece, not to minimize it, right? Like, wow, all I can do is pray. It's like the power of prayer. There's the chataka bird, which is a little bird who in our philosophy has this call and is basically unwilling to drink anything but rainwater. Even if there's puddles and even if there's, all other sources of water, they could be like right next to like a lake or like a canal. And they're like, no, I just want rainwater. I just want rainwater. I just want rainwater. And they just call for that water and they call for that water. That's us calling for love and calling for love and calling for love and calling for love and unwilling to settle for anything less than love. But then when the monsoon clouds come rolling in, right, they don't just like rain into the bird's mouth. It rains over the whole landscape. Everybody gets water, even people that didn't even dream of praying or calling out for that water. So thinking about ourselves as like little chataka birds who are like calling out like water, water, love, love, love. It's like when God brings love, he brings love for everybody. The rain falls over the desert and falls over the ocean and falls over the plants and falls over the people and falls over everybody. So that's what we're praying for, right? We don't just pray like, please come give me a few drops and then everybody else, they could just kind of figure out their own relate. It's like, no, bring the monsoon, nourish the whole landscape, rain all over everybody. And that's a powerful prayer because when rain comes, how many times have we received rain like unbidden? Like someone must have been praying on my behalf because I I received some grace that I didn't even know I was praying for. So yeah, I hope that's satisfying. That's kind of what comes to mind with your thing. I had to plug in my computer, so I'm still listening, but I just need to move the plug.
No worries, Dhanya. Thank you so much, Becca, for your question and being so patient to ask it. So we are winding down towards the end, ladies. We do want to make sure that you're clear as to how you can further connect with Dhanya. So Dhanya, I'm going to put the links in the chat, but do you want to share how you would like to connect further with others, please?
Sure. If anybody wants to keep in touch, you can join my Instagram. You can find me at Dhanya, Dhanya Wellness, or at Dhanya, Dhanya Music. So depending on, you can follow both, and that's a good way to keep in touch. Yeah, I have another talk that I'm giving with Dayal this coming Wednesday at noon Eastern time, and we're going to talk about a related but a slightly different topic, which is spirituality without spiritual bypassing. Which is a hot topic, and it's been requested many times for each of us to speak on it. So we're going to join together and talk about it. And actually, Dayal and I are also leading a pilgrimage to India, and that's going to be in February. If anybody wants to join us, it's a really cool opportunity to, yeah, really dive deep in really holy places. And a lot of what we'll talk about on the retreat, a lot of what we'll work on the retreat is this kind of discussion. Dial comes from like an internal family systems background. I come from my background, and so we partner together and we really like study these subjects in addition to allowing the landscape and the environment and the like, yeah, just the mystical charge and energy of the place to help create this container for like really deep, nourishing spiritual work and interpersonal work. So it's really kind of going on a journey internally and also externally that fosters kind of taking our practice and our relationships to the next level. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can reach out to me directly. I think Damodar Priya Prabhu said that she was going to, yeah, maybe drop it into the WhatsApp chat. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me directly as well.
Thank you, Dhanya. Oh my goodness. I feel like we're like those birds. We're just still thirsty for more from you. So thank you so much. So yes, I put the link in our Zoom chat, but I will also be sharing it on WhatsApp and through the other media as well. So thank you again, Dhanya. This has been absolutely amazing. And since your retreat is in February, that leaves people with plenty of time to be able to do Rukmini Walker and Gauravani's retreat, which is in January. And she is back. Okay, great. So she will be speaking about next month's Urban Devi and also talking about her retreat in January. So Rukmini Prabhu, please go ahead.
That was so brilliant, Dhanya. I'm so grateful. I think we're all so grateful. It was absolutely just brilliant and so relatable and so helpful. So deeply grateful to you. So yeah, next month I'm going to be presenting and I want to talk about welcoming the guest, the dearmost friend. Every morning I anticipate an encounter with divinity in their most accessible yet invisible presence, the holy names. Where is my interest, my affection, my thirst for receiving them each day? And through story, prayer, and poetry, we will explore this idea of welcoming the guest, the dearmost friend. So please join us next month, which is going to be October 12th. Please mark your calendars. And again, so grateful to you, Dhanya, and so grateful to you, Damodar Priya. Amazing session. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, and Rukmini,
Oh,
did you want to
yes.
mention about the retreat?
And Gauravani and I have our retreat the second 2 weeks of January at Govardhan Eco Village. We can put the link in the chat. Please join us at Govardhan Eco Village, most magical holy place, about 2 hours outside of Mumbai, second 2 weeks of January, ending with the flower festival, famous flower festival. Hare Krishna, thank you all for being here.